So in my lag video with the DCMA 14 point, I mentioned that lags can inadvertently affect the critical path, and this is what I'm going to explain now. When you have a lag, you can see here that I do have a lag on my task activity D, and it says that there's a 2-day lag. What I'm saying when I say that there is an adverse effect when using lags on your critical path is that it's all about your intent on using that lag. Sometimes lag values are saying that they represent something that's outside of your scope, like a review from the government that's reviewing something of yours, or if you're allowing paint to dry, that type of thing that you are just putting a lag in there for. But that's where I mentioned that if you know what it is, put the task actually in there so you know, instead of putting that lag, because again, that lag is hidden. When you look at the Gantt side, you can't tell why that task is being delayed. So where it adversely affects and why DCMA cares about lags, they still allow you to have some because they understand there's instances and when it's relevant. But you can use lags to manipulate your float or slack, or you can use lags to restrain your schedule. So if you're using a lag to force a task to start or finish on a certain date, that's what this metric is trying to get, is stop using lags to try and get a task to finish or start on a certain date. That is not how a lag should be used. So in this instance, I'm going to show you how a lag on your critical path is just like using a start no earlier than and how it affects it. So here we do have the 2-day lag. If I were to click on that and I'm going to erase it and say that it is 0 day, you can see how that task pulls in and it's showing that there's a slack. Now, what if you really did want it to start no earlier than that date? Because for some reason, that's there. That's where you really do need to put a task in to say, what are we holding on? Is there like a week of something that we're holding on? Or if there's a 2-day event that we're looking at, then put it in there. So I will change this to be a start no earlier than and put it as the 11/29 date. Once I do that, you can see it's still on the critical path because it did not move task activity E, so it's saying it is on the critical path. But what if I change that to just by 1 day and to say start no earlier than 11:30? Then you can see the critical path is messed up. It's showing that just those 2 tasks, activity D and E, are the only ones on the critical path. There's no relationship to it. Your lag is almost essentially the same thing. You're breaking up your critical path because you're essentially making it a start no earlier than, even though you're not. But if you're trying to just use a lag to force a task to start or finish on a certain date, you're essentially doing the same thing. You're putting this constraint on a task to manipulate it, and that is not the purpose of a lag. You don't want to use a lag to manipulate your float or to get a start and finish on a certain date. So that's what this metric is looking at, is making sure that you're not manipulating your schedule to just hit a date because of something. You need to have that logic and that flow and for it to be a dynamic forecasting model. So in that example, I was just showing how a start no earlier than affects your critical path, but essentially lags do the same thing. So we want to put in a task and make sure that instead of a lag, use the actual task, because it's all about the intent of how you're using your lag. If you're using your lag to force a task to start or finish on a certain date, you're manipulating it and you're not giving that logic. If you know why that task isn't starting until that date, put that reason in there. Don't just create a lag. Here, they're both on the critical path, but what if I just added it? I said, okay, I really wanted it to start on November 30th. I'm gonna add that lag, and then when I do that, it makes it be that is the critical path, but then it takes away from the other activities because everybody cares about the critical path. They always want you to run the critical path report. So then you're just taking it away and you're not looking at activity F, G, and H, which really are tasks that have the logic to them and they're not being manipulated. So you're taking attention away and forcing certain tasks to be on the critical path when maybe they probably aren't. That is why lags are important. That's how they affect the critical path, and that's why you shouldn't use them. You need to actually put what the task is, and don't use lags to manipulate your schedule.